Hello and welcome back. This video we're going to be looking at centers, and today we'll be using my brand new 23-24 weighted rankings and a k-means clustering algorithm to determine how the top 25 centers break up into tiers. So this one's going to be pretty involved, so let's get right into it. So we'll start with this, and this is pretty self-explanatory. It's a tier list. You've seen it before. We have the GOAT, which is going to be pretty obvious in about 30 seconds. Elite, great, good, and then from down there, anything underneath that is below the top 25 centers. So we'll start with the GOAT. It's Connor McDavid. There's no surprise here. 1.87 points per game, 0.78 goals per game, 1.09 assists per game, 4.29 shots per game, 0.87 power play points per game, and he ranks 100th percentile in each of those categories that I just mentioned. And he also averaged 1 hit per game last year and about half a block per game. So he's been increasing his overall completeness over the past number of years. Obviously, he's in a league of his own in terms of point per game rating, 1.9 at points this season. He's about 0.4 points per game better than the next best player on this list. So he's in a category all on his own. There's no real explanation needed. So we're just going to go on to the elite tier from here. Now, the next guy up is Nathan MacKinnon. Now, this usually I would say draft McDavid number 1, draft Draisaitl number 2, and I would probably still say that. But last year, MacKinnon went off and had his first 100-point season in the NHL, and mostly that was due to him missing time. 1.56 points per game, 0.59 goals per game, 0.97 assists per game, over 5 shots per game, which is incredible, and 0.48 power play points per game. So 100th percentile in all of those except for goals, where he was 99th percentile. Just about 3/4 of a hit per game and a little bit over a half a block per game. So he's almost as complete as McDavid, and he's just about, I guess, 0.3 points per game below McDavid, which is why McDavid is in a tier of his own. But Nathan MacKinnon has arrived as one of the top 2 or 3 fantasy players in the league, in any kind of league format, because he does so much for you. He's incredibly complete. He gets a ton of shot volume, the power play time, and everything else. The only thing he hasn't been able to do as much as some of the other guys is stay healthy. Over the past 5 years, he's played in 88.85% of his team's games, which is not bad at all. It's just not elite level where he's staying healthy consistently and he's constantly in your lineup. He's typically between 65-70 games per season, at least when he's missing some time. He's out 5, 10, 15 games depending on what it is, but it doesn't matter because you want him in the playoffs when your team is fighting for a fantasy championship. So he's definitely in the elite tier. He's the number 2 ranked center. Obviously, I just alluded to it. Number 3, Leon Draisaitl. He's a little bit less complete than the other 2 players, but 1.6 points per game, 100th percentile in points, goals, assists, and power play points, and he's still averaging 3 shots per game. Now, you're looking at McDavid averaging 4.29 shots per game, MacKinnon over 5 shots per game, Draisaitl a little bit below that at 3 shots per game. So if you're in a league format with point weighting that doesn't weight shots per game or shots in general as that high, then maybe Draisaitl would definitely be number 2 because he does have that higher point ceiling in terms of the fact that he's hit 1.5, 1.6 points per game a couple of times in his career compared to Nathan MacKinnon, who's kind of just elevated his play over the years. But no doubt, either of these 2 guys at number 2 overall in your fantasy draft would be exceptional draft picks, and you would be laughing all the way to probably the playoffs, if not the championship. Then at number 3, this may come as a surprise because he had a down year last year, but he was the number 1 ranked player on my completeness rankings. So Austin Matthews completely rechanged his game and became a shot blocker all of a sudden out of nowhere. He's averaging 1.05 hits per game, 1.24 blocks per game. Now, he did have a down year in terms of his points, 1.15 points per game, a little bit over half a goal per game. He was about a mid-40 goal pace, which is low for him. He's a 60 goal scorer. So that's something that you have to bake in, is the regression back up to where he was a couple years ago, where he was a 60 goal guy. He's at least a 50 goal guy most years. Last year he was dealing with a hand injury, so that probably played into it. Averaging 4.42 shots per game. So if you didn't like Draisaitl's 3 shots per game, you're going to get a little bit more with Matthews at 4.42. Still doing it on the power play, 0.38 power play points per game. He's only 100th percentile in shots, but he's 98th in points, 98th in goals, 95th in assists, 97th in power play points, 50th in hits, and 79th in blocks. So incredibly complete, the number 1 most complete player in fantasy last year. And if you get this guy at number 3 or 4, you're going to be extremely happy with that. But that's going to do it for the elite list. There's a significant drop off after that to the next level of centers. So we'll get into this. These next 2 tiers will be relatively longer, because the list, it starts with the elite guys. These are the guys that are going to, help you carry your team. Now you're getting into the guys that you're going to need to, complement with some other players. So let's start it off. Jack Hughes has some incredible upside. There's no doubt about that. He is maybe not as complete as some of these other guys, but his trajectory has just been, nothing but up. So in my completeness rankings, he was a 48, a 59, a 71, now a 73. That's because he doesn't hit at all, doesn't block shots. But if you're just looking at offensive categories, 1.27 points per game, over half a goal per game, 0.72 assists per game, 4.3 shots per game, and 0.40 power play points per game. 99th, 99th, 98th, 100th, and 97th percentiles respectively. So he is the upper echelon in terms of what you're getting offensively from a center, and there's no reason to believe that this is going to stop. I genuinely believe that he could be in this elite tier in terms of his point production, his goals. When he came into the league, I didn't think he was a goal scorer, but he's definitely a goal scorer now. He was on pace for just shy of 50 goals, and I definitely think he will hit 50, if not this year, in the next couple of years. He has that shot volume as well. There was a stretch in December and January where he was averaging 5 or 6 shots per game. And if you bet the over, if you were doing the shot props and you were betting the over on Hughes, and I mentioned that on the channel, you were going to be making some money off of that. So nothing has changed in Jersey. In fact, they only got better. They added Tyler Toffoli. So there's a lot of pieces for him to work with. He's definitely going to be on the power play. Everything runs through Jack Hughes, and he showed up when it mattered the most in the playoffs last year. He was one of the few guys that was consistent throughout that Rangers series and then continued his production into the Kane series. He was a second half beast 2 years ago, which is why I highlighted him on the channel, and he carried that over into last year, and he's going to continue that into this year. If you can get him right around where he's, I have him listed at 13th overall in my 23-24 weighted rankings. If you can get him in the early second round, that's going to be money in the bank for you, and you're definitely going to be happy with that pick. Now, up next, we have Mika Zibanejad, and this may surprise some of you if you're not familiar with his game or you're not understanding what he does on a regular basis. But in terms of completeness, his rating was very consistent for 3 years. Then it dipped in 21-22 from an 85 down to a 79, and then back up to an 81. But he's incredibly consistent year in, year out. He does the same stuff. He's a goal scorer by trade. He obviously gets it done more so on the power play, but 98th percentile in points per game, 97th in goals, 96th in assists, 94th in shots, 3 shots per game, 99th in power play points, 0.48 power play points per game, so almost a power play point every other game, and a lot of those are power play goals. Now, obviously, last year, the power play goals were down a little bit. He had a ton the year that Kreider went off, and he had 26. Mika Zibanejad had a bunch as well. That power play has not really changed. They're going to potentially have someone else who's very skilled on that power play unit, whether it's Blake Wheeler or Lafreniere, Kakko, whoever they're going to throw their Trocheck. But nonetheless, the other 4 guys haven't changed, and it's very elite level power play that you're getting access to with Zibanejad, and he doesn't really dip. He's been very consistent other than that one drop off from 2021 to 21-22. He bumped right back up after that, and I could see that trajectory continuing this year. So Zibanejad is definitely one of those guys that I'm going to be looking at this year if I'm drafting in the right position, but I have him currently He's the sixth best center. So you're looking at, just trying to find it here, 18th overall on my 23-24 weighted ranking. So if you can get him in the mid-second round, you're going to be very happy with that. Obviously, you're not getting the point ceiling of some of these other guys, but these are top 4 picks, and you're potentially getting this in the mid-second round. So definitely something to keep an eye on there. Up next, we have John Tavares, another guy who kind of gets overlooked. He's right behind Zibanejad at 19th overall on my rankings. He's one of those guys that a lot of people don't pay too much attention to just because of the fact that you have Matthews, Nylander, Marner all on the same team. But he is very complete. So 6th best center on my completeness rankings, 15th on the completeness rankings, 96th percentile in points. He's at 1 point per game, 96th in goals, 93rd in assists, 98th, 3.46 shots per game, which is a little bit surprising if you don't watch his game too much, and 99th percentile on the power play. So about a half a 0.49. So about a half a point per on the power play. So a point every other game on the power play is what I'm trying to say, if I can get it out of my mouth. But he's extremely complete. He's basically a mid 40 goal scorer at best, but he's going to do that consistently, and he's been trending up over the past 4 years on my completeness rankings: 77, 78, 81, and 82. So just a nice, slow, incremental rise year to year. Not much has changed in the top 6 in terms of the elite talent that he's going to be exposed to. Maybe he gets Tyler Bertuzzi on his wing this year. Maybe it's William Nylander. Who knows what they're going to do with the top 6, but he's going to have people to work with. So that's an excellent pick if you're going to get him in the back end of the second round, which is where I have him ranked. Now up next, Elias Pettersson. He is the 3rd most complete player on my rankings. He increased his blocks totals to 1.1 blocks per game, just under a hit per game as well. And then he's 99th percentile, 1.28 points per game, 97th percentile, just a shade under half a goal per game, 99th percentile in assists, 0.79 per game, 3.21 shots per game, and then 93rd percentile in power play points as well. And there's reason to believe he can continue this. So he's been trending up over the last 3 years, took a nice healthy jump, a 12-point jump in my completeness rankings from a 74 to an 86 from 21-22 to 22-23. And he's a guy that is going to continue to get the rock. Like, they're going to continue to use him in every situation that they possibly can. And now that he's kind of established himself, early in his career, he was a little bit easy to push off the puck. Didn't have that fortitude and that strength on his stick. Now he does have that. He's a little bit better defensively, and so Rick Tocchet can lean on him and use him in some different situations, and that's going to be beneficial for you as an Elias Pettersson owner. And there's reason to believe that you're going to find him, mid-second round or later. And that would be, again, money in the bank for you. I have him ranked 24th on my weighted rankings, but in certain, different point weighting leagues, you could have him as high as the top 5 or the top 10, depending on what you're looking for, because he is incredibly prolific. Just a shade under 1.3 points per game is, rarefied air. It's probably top 10 in the league in terms of, most seasons you're going to get a couple of guys that are above 1.4. You're going to get a couple of guys that are in 1.3 to 1.4 range, and then he's right below that. So an incredible jump in his trajectory last year, and I can see that continuing this year. Next, we have Sasha Barkov, and this is a complicated file for me because I've said a couple times on this channel that he's a little bit overrated in fantasy. And what I meant by that was he's more complete as a real NHL player than he is as a fantasy player. He doesn't get a ton of hits, 0.76 hits per game, 0.71 blocks per game. But if those categories don't mean anything to you, he is very elite, and he's probably a very solid second round pick. So 1.15 points per game, 98th percentile there. 90th percentile in goals. You'd like to see that a little bit higher if he was to be a first round pick, which he's not right now. 99th percentile in assists, 0.81 assists per game, 3 shots per game, and then 98th percentile in power play points. And he's been relatively consistent over the past 3 years as well. He doesn't really need a ton of other people to rely on. Now, you'll remember in 21-22, they won the President's Trophy, and they had this incredible season. He didn't really drop off after that. He continued, and he was essentially the same player last year. So that's comforting to know. When you're in this range, you don't want to take risks. You want the safe bets, and this is as safe as they come. He's kind of like a better version of Sebastian Aho in that regard. He's constantly in this 1 to 1.2 point per game range. If he's going to average you 3 shots per game, that's going to help you out as well. And I have him, again, he's one of those guys that I used to think was a little bit overdrafted, but I don't necessarily see that happening right now. He's 25th on my 23-24 weighted ranking. So if you can get him at the turn of the second to third round in a 12-team league, that would definitely be where you'd want to target him. If you can get him later than that, then you're going to be getting incredible value for a player who's as consistent as they come. And again, there's a lot of injuries in Florida, and he's not injured, so he should be able to start the season and take it off from there. As guys get healthier, he will continue to improve, hopefully. Now, up next, we have JT Miller, who is, again, one of the most complete players, the number 2 most complete player in my completeness fantasy rankings. 1 point per game, which is 96th percentile, 0.40 goals per game, just a shade under a 40-goal pace, 96th percentile in assists, 91st in shots, 97th in power play points, 91st percentile in hits, 2.47 hits per game. So if you're in a bangers league and you want that center, or a couple years ago he was a 3-position eligible guy, they've been stripping that away lately. But if you can get this guy and he's dual position eligible, and you're getting that almost 2.5 hits per game, in addition to all of those offensive categories, this is going to be one of those guys that's going to do everything for you. You click his name, you draft him, and then you just set it and forget it. You don't have to worry about him the rest of the season. Position rank 2, skater rank 2 in my completeness rankings. He's been one of those guys that found a nice little niche in Vancouver, and he seemed to have popped off in the second half under Rick Tocchet. He took off once he got there. He was well over a point per game. I think he was 1.15 points per game when Tocchet became the coach. So that's improving under new circumstances, and he can potentially continue that into this season. So that's definitely a guy that I'm looking at. I would look at him in the second, maybe the third round. I have him listed at 27th. If you can get him later than that, that would be great. But I think a lot of people are on to him now in terms of how complete he is, especially in bangers leagues where he's putting up 2.5 hits per game. Now, up next is a guy that you don't need an introduction to is Steven Stamkos. He's a guy who used to be a 50, 60 goal scorer. He doesn't necessarily have that ceiling anymore. I have him at 28th on my rankings, but he's a guy that's still getting it done. He's still putting up points, 1.04 points per game, 96th percentile in points, 95th in goals, just a shade under 40-goal pace, 96th in assists, just a shade under 3 shots per game, and 98th percentile in power play points. And on top of that, he's getting 1.14 hits per game. So not irrelevant in a bangers league either. He's been trending in the right direction over the last 3 seasons, 75, 81, 83 in my completeness rankings. And then on top of all of that, you have to factor in the guys on Tampa Bay hadn't had a complete offseason in about 4 years. They were, 2-time Stanley Cup champions, went back to the finals, and then last year was the first year where they got kicked out early, and they potentially had some time to recoup and re-energize, and then take a full offseason to prepare for the upcoming season. So they're usually a team that you don't necessarily want in the regular season as much, because come March, they kind of mail it in. They know that they're in the playoffs. They kind of take it easy until they get, a week or 2 away from the playoffs. Then they ramp it up a bit. And that's the time when your fantasy playoffs are going on. But right now, they've had a full offseason to prepare, and they kind of have to mark their territory again. They've lost a number of guys. They lost Killorn in the offseason. They lost McDonough the previous season. They've lost Ross Colton this offseason. So they have to kind of identify who they are as a team. And that could set up for a nice regular season for a number of Tampa Bay Lightning, including Steven Stamkos. So this is a guy, again, I have him ranked 28th, in my weighted rankings. And if you can get him in the early third round, that would be an excellent value play, especially for a guy who's a known goal scorer. Now up next, again, another guy a little bit longer in the tooth, Sidney Crosby. Last year, I did this video a couple months ago about how Gretzky compared to McDavid. And in that video, I looked at the top 10 or 15 point per game guys in the league last year. Sidney Crosby was about 1.26 points per game at that point when I did the video. And that was putting him on the same pace as Wayne Gretzky at the same age. So he's putting up Gretzky-like numbers in terms of what Gretzky was doing at this exact same age in about 96, 97. So the fact that Crosby is still getting it done, he's 1.13 points per game last year, 0.40 goals per game, 94th percentile there, 98th percentile in assists, over 3 shots per game, 3.11, and then 94th percentile on the power play, getting a couple hits here and there, but that's not why you're owning him. And then obviously you're going to think about Erik Karlsson coming over. They still have Chris Letang. They still have Jake Gensel. When he comes back healthy, he usually plays shotgun with Sidney Crosby. So not a lot has changed. Crosby's been one of the most consistent players over the past couple of years. On my completeness rankings, he's an 83 in 18-19. Then a 77, then an 81, then an 80, then an 80. So he's incredibly consistent, incredibly complete in terms of what he does for you. He's not a big hitter or shot blocker, but in terms of what he does, very consistent, and he's still getting you a relatively high point per game rating and goal number, which is something that you don't necessarily see from a lot of these older guys. Sometimes they slow down a little bit and you don't necessarily want access to. Some guys are going to forget about him in their draft because of the fact that he's been around for so long. I have him at ranked 31. If he goes there, that would be incredible value in my opinion. Because again, he is a generational talent and he's been doing it for a long enough time where you don't really have to worry about him. You're not taking a risk by drafting Sidney Crosby, and he's been relatively healthy. Obviously, he's missed some time with concussions earlier in his career, but over the past couple of years, he's been a little bit more healthy than he was previously. So this is definitely a guy, if you're taking a safe bet, I would definitely look at Sidney Crosby. And then his partner in crime is coming up soon, so you don't want to miss that. But first, we have William Nylander. And this is a guy I used to get in the 9th round. About 2 or 3 years ago, I would draft him in the 8th or 9th round every single year, and I would be laughing all the way to the championship. But that is not the case this year because obviously guys are on to him now. And oh yeah, it's a contract year, William Nylander. So you're looking at a guy who's going to be motivated. I think he just recently came out and said that he wasn't concerned about his contract status because of the fact that he still has a year left. And what I think he meant by that was, watch me tear it up, and I'm going to tear it up and get my money, because he seems to be a guy that definitely is motivated by money. Just over a point per game last year, 1.06, 97th percentile. Just a shade under half a goal per game, 97th percentile there. 0.57 assists per game, 3.57 shots per game, and then 95th percentile in power play points. Doesn't hit or block at all, so that's not why you're owning him, but he's definitely a guy offensively that you're going to want to target, especially in points leagues that don't have hits or blocks, because he's going to be even more valuable for your team. And again, contract year William Nylander, I don't really have to tell you, if you've been paying attention at all, why that matters. And he's going... Right now, I have him at 37 on my weighted rankings, and I would imagine that he goes a little bit before that in terms of his ADP, because if people are smart, they're going to take a look at that and say, yeah, I want contract year William Nylander, especially with this loaded Toronto offense. As I just alluded to it, Evgeny Malkin, another guy long in the tooth. People seem to forget about him, and it depends on what you think about him and older players in general. That's what you're going to think of Malkin, because some people probably have him ranked a lot lower. But when you're looking at what he does when he's actually on the ice, now he does have a problem staying healthy. 64% of his team's games he's played in over the past 5 years, which is not good. That means he is a significant injury risk. But when he's in the lineup, he's still a point per game guy, 96th percentile in that regard. 89th percentile in goals per game, 97th in assists, 92nd in shots, just a shade under 3 shots per game, and 98th in power play points. And you're going to get exposure to all of those guys on that Pittsburgh power play, including Erik Karlsson, who just put up a 100-point season as a defenseman. So whether it's Letang and Karlsson, Malkin, Crosby, Gensel, or whoever else they're going to throw out there, there's going to be talent for him to work with, and he's going to rack up the power play points. So if you're in a points league that has power play point weighting, maybe power play goals, power play assists, if there's anything there, you're going to want access to the Pittsburgh power play. I'm not saying it's going to work magically right off the bat. Sometimes 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, and maybe there's a little bit, too many cooks in the kitchen type of thing going on, but Malkin is relatively consistent. 78, 78, 70, 76, 74. So he's been hovering in that mid-70s range in terms of my completeness rankings over the last number of years. He just hasn't stayed healthy, which is why it's kind of keeping him back from that elite level where he used to be in terms of fantasy. But he's still a really good option, and if he falls, right now I have him sort of in that range. 38 is on my 23-24 weighted rankings. If he falls well below that, let's say he's in the 50s, that's value for you, and you can find some value in that older name type of situation where a lot of guys are gravitating towards the younger, newer names. Maybe Connor Bedard goes before Malkin, but there's no reason to believe that Malkin isn't going to outperform Connor Bedard. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but there's a track record there. You can look at the data and prove that Malkin has done this consistently over the last 15 plus years. So this is a guy, again, another safe bet. I would assume Crosby's a little bit safer because of the injury risk being a little bit better. But this is a guy, if you want that high risk, high reward, he's definitely going to provide that for you, and you're getting exposure to some elite talent on that power play. Last but not least, Braden Point. And this is a guy who scored 50 goals last year, and I was listening to NHL Radio Today talk about him. They were mentioning Boomer and Jake Hahn talking about him. Is he a 50-goal scorer, or is he a guy who scored 50 goals? And I think it's the latter. And we had this conversation last year with Chris Kreider. Is he a 50-goal scorer? No. He's a guy who scored 50 goals. But that doesn't mean he's a bad player, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't draft him. So last year, 1.16 points per game, 98th percentile. 0.62 goals per game, 100th percentile. So he's top 3 in goals last year. 91st percentile in assists, 91st in shots, and 96th in power play points. And there's reason to believe that that could bump up a little bit more. Look at the power play that they have. They've got either Sergachev or Hedman on the point. They've got Kucherov and Stamkos. Braden Point's in the bumper position. It doesn't matter really who they throw in front. Maybe Tanner Jeannot, maybe Brandon Hagel. But that power play has been intact for a number of years. Again, this is another one of those Tampa players who's gotten a full offseason to recoup and train for this upcoming season. This is a guy that I would definitely be targeting in that 3rd to 4th round range. I have him at number 40 overall. So if you can find him in that range, you're getting access to a guy who's hit 50 goals before. Maybe he's not going to hit 50 again. Maybe he becomes a 40-goal guy, 90-point guy, and you're not going to be disappointed with that at all if you're getting that in the 3rd or 4th round. That's it for the great tier. We're going to start now with the good tier. It's almost as long. I'll try to go through these a little bit quicker. We'll start it off with Travis Konecny, a guy who's been really underrated for a number of years. He's been, Philadelphia is not a team that people look at in terms of fantasy performance, but he is their best player on a regular basis, at least last year and maybe the last 2 years. So 96th percentile, just over a point per game. Over a half a goal per game, 98th percentile there, 96th percentile in shots per game, 3.18, 88th in assists, 88th in points, just under a hit per game, and he's been trending kind of up. So over the past 3 seasons, a 70, 71, and then an 80 in my completeness rankings. So he's been getting a little bit of everything done. Relatively healthy, 95% of his team's games over the last 5 years he's appeared in. And he's a guy that is going to get overlooked because he's in Philadelphia. Nobody wants Philadelphia Flyers. He might be classified as a right winger in terms of Yahoo. Yahoo's been messing with their positional flexibility and taking away dual eligibility and whatnot. I believe he was a center right wing last year. I'm using, I believe, Rotowire data, which lists him as a center, so that's why he's on this list. But either way, he's definitely a guy you're going to want to target because of the fact that nobody's going to want him. But he's, somebody has to play power play in Philadelphia. Somebody has to score the goals, and he is the best player on Philadelphia by a relatively significant margin. You could mention that Owen Tippett is a very up-and-coming player. He was pretty similarly rated in terms of his completeness ranking last year. If you're looking at Forrester's an excellent deep league option. especially if you're in a keeper league. But for the most part, guys are not going to be picking Philadelphia Flyers this year, and he's the best option for them. That's one of those categories, good player on a bad team, and you could target him. Let's see, I have him right about the number 47 in terms of the weighted rankings. So he will be available for you in the 4th or 5th round, depending on your league size. And that's an excellent value play for a guy who's over a point per game and does a lot of everything else in terms of shots, power play, goal production as well. And we typically like goal producers over assist heavy guys because you can find those assist guys later. Now, up next, we have a guy that I drafted. I actually didn't draft him last year. Right after my draft was over, I threw Max Pacioretty on IR, and I picked up Dylan Larkin off waivers. That's how low people thought of him last year, at least in my league. But he is definitely not that low this year. Dylan Larkin is one of those guys that's going to potentially benefit from DeBrincat coming over. Maybe Raymond has a better season than he did last year, and that could potentially boost him as well. But as it stands last year, just a shade under a point per game, 0.40 goals per game, 94th percentile in that category, 94th in assists, 94th in shots, over 3 shots per game, and 97th in power play points. And again, who are they going to throw out on that power play? It doesn't really matter because he's going to be on it. Whether it's DeBrincat, whether it's Perron, whether it's Raymond, whether it's Sider, whether it's they brought Gostisbehere over. Who knows who's going to be quarterbacking that power play? But Dylan Larkin will be on it, and he's been relatively healthy over the last 5 years. 89% of his team's games over the past 5 years, and again, you're getting access to some of those guys in the top 6 in Detroit, and Detroit should be better. I don't know how much better they're going to be this year, but they should be a little bit better, more complete. If they get some goaltending, they could push for a playoff spot. And this is a guy that you're going to want to target in those mid to 4th to 5th round ranges, depending on your league size, because he's one of those guys that gets overlooked. I have him at 48 on my rankings, and he's again one of those guys that I've gone to a number of times. I've had him for 3 or 4 seasons in a row. That might mean I don't get him this year because people are going to be on to him now, but they weren't a couple years ago. So if they aren't this year, you could sneak in and grab him, and he's a very nice fantasy asset, especially if you have shots on goal as a category or as a heavily weighted category in terms of your point weighting. Now up next, Jack Eichel. I should probably have him higher because of the fact that he did have a higher point ceiling when he was with Buffalo. But he's kind of switched to become a miniature Patrice Bergeron in the sense that he's kind of rounded out his two-way game. Obviously, he wins a cup last year. His name value might be a little bit higher, and maybe he doesn't go quite as low or whatever in the draft because of that name value, but he has been relatively complete over the past couple seasons. Just a shade under a point per game. 94th percentile in goals, 94th in assists, 97th in shots, 3.33 shots per game. And there was a point, I had him when he first came over to Vegas, there was a point where he was averaging well over that number in terms of shots per game. There's a couple games where he had 8, 9, 10 shots per game. So he does have that in his history in terms of getting that shot volume that's going to be elite level. If he could get back to that 4+ shot per game number, he's definitely going to be value at where he's going to be drafted this year. The power play hasn't been great in terms of Vegas as a whole. They kind of switch back and forth between Theodore and Pietrangelo quarterbacking the power play. Sometimes they move guys in and out. He's 84th percentile in power play points, which is what's dragging him down and putting him into this good level. But if they can get that power play working, and obviously he's not been healthy over the past number of years, if he can stay healthy, he would definitely be in this great tier. For sure, at least. Maybe he could rise into that elite tier depending on who he's playing with and the situation and whatnot. But because of the injury risk, because of the lack of power play production, he's down here. But that could mean really good value for you. Maybe I have him at 49. He could potentially be a 4th rounder for you. Obviously, the goalie run happens in the 3rd round a lot of the time. So if you can get him in that 4th, 5th round range, that's an excellent center to add to your team. 3 or 4 picks in, depending on where you're drafting. So Jack Eichel, definitely a guy I'm keeping an eye on this year. But up next, Jamie Benn, a guy I don't really have my eye on. I'm never really a Jamie Benn guy, but he did turn back the clock last year, and he did become fantasy relevant again after years of me thinking that he was kind of over the hill and done. And the reason why I thought that he was on a 3-year downward trajectory in my completeness rankings. So 80, 76, 75, but then he bumps back up to a 79 last year. And he did that on the back of just a shade under a point per game, 0.95 points per game, 94th percentile in goals, 92nd in assists, 96th in power play points. So he definitely cranked it up on the power play. That helped him. I think having the youthful injection, guys like Wyatt Johnston and others that are coming into Dallas, they have Stankoven who might make the team this year. There's a number of players around him that have been helping him get back to form, and that is helping him for sure. He's at 1.18 hits per game as well, which means you're not going to target him for hits, but he does do that as well. And he has been relatively healthy, 97% of his team's games over the last 5 years. So he's relatively consistent. I wouldn't necessarily bank on him having another great year. I'm a little bit lower on him than some of the other guys on this list, but if you're looking for consistency, if you're looking for that veteran presence, Jamie Benn, again, Dallas is going to be one of those top teams in the West. They have an excellent defense, and they started to score last year. That top line is what you would want exposure to. He's not necessarily on that, but if he's on the top power play and he's 96th percentile in power play points, that could persuade you to draft him this year. Up next is a guy that I've been talking about a couple points during this offseason, and he's had a very nice trajectory over the last 4 seasons, and that's Eriksson Ek. He's been climbing up in his completeness rankings from a 43 in 18-19 to a 62 to a 70 to a 78 to an 82 last year. So very complete. Not a high point ceiling, not a guy that you're going to target for specific, offensive categories, but if you're looking for completeness, he does a lot of everything. So 88th percentile in points, 86th in goals, 87th in assists, 96th percentile in shots, 3.17 shots per game, 92nd percentile in power play points, 1.53 hits per game, which is nice to see. And then he's 58th percentile in shot blocks as well. So if you have faceoffs as a category, he does quite a bit of faceoff taking as well. I'm not exactly sure what his percentage is off the top of my head, but I do remember having him in my faceoff league, and he was getting me 10 to 15 points a game because I got 1 point per faceoff win, which is kind of ridiculous, but nonetheless, he does take and win a bunch of faceoffs. So if you're in a faceoff league, that could potentially persuade you to draft him a little bit higher. He's one of those guys that is kind of under the radar. Nobody really talks about him, but I definitely have noticed his trajectory heading up in the right direction over the past number of years. Now, I have him at 63 on my rankings because of that lack of point ceiling. So if you're looking for points specifically, he's not the guy to go for. If you're looking for faceoffs, if you're looking for shots, if you're looking for power play points and consistency and an upward trajectory over the past 4 years plus, this is definitely a guy you're going to want to keep your eye on. He's been growing and kind of coming into his own as a Minnesota Wild player, and they need that because Marco Rossi hasn't really come around yet. So they definitely need that top line center type of player, and he could provide that for them this upcoming season. And he definitely did last year. Up next is a guy I mentioned in one of my previous videos, the second half video, I believe, and that's Adrian Kempe. Now, he's a guy, he might be listed as a different position type of player. This is, again, one of those things where I'm grabbing data from Rotowire. It might be different on Yahoo or ESPN. He's been trending up over the past 5 seasons. So a 47, a 60, 66, 73, and then a 75 last year on my completeness rankings. 90th percentile in points, 97th in goals, half a goal per game. Shot volume, 94th percentile. Power play points, 87th. And then 1.45 hits per game, 67th percentile there. So you're looking for goals, shots, power play points, and a couple of hits from Kempe. And on top of that, he's in LA, playing in their top 6, probably on their top power play unit. And their top 6 just got bolstered by bringing in Pierre-Luc Dubois, who I'm not a huge fan of, but nonetheless, that does make them deeper. They can slot that Deneau, Moore, Arvidsson line as their third line, have Dubois center the second line. Maybe they have Kempe with Kopitar and Byfield as their first line. Nonetheless, you're getting top 6 exposure. You're getting power play exposure from him, shot volume, goals, hits, and power play points. So he may not be as complete. The assists are 71st percentile, not a lot of shot blocks. But other than that, you're getting a guy who's going to be very valuable in certain league formats. So if your point weighting favors goals, shots, power play points, and hits, he becomes a little bit more valuable than your average player in this range. I would look at him probably no earlier than the 5th, 6th round. I have him ranked 68th overall, which is probably going to be value for you if you can get him there. I wouldn't look at him any earlier than that, though, because, again, the assists aren't there. The point ceiling isn't necessarily that crazy, 0.82 points per game, which is why he's in the good tier. But definitely a guy to keep your eye on if you have those categories in your league. Up next is another complete center, a guy who's been trending in the right direction over the past number of years, Nico Hischier. I hate saying this as a Rangers fan, but the Devils are loaded. And he's one of the reasons why. He's a very complete two-way center. Some of the Devils fan pages I follow were talking about him shutting down the Rangers last year, and I don't know how much that's true. I would tend to favor the argument that the Rangers just didn't show up in Game 7 or in a number of the other games as well, but Hischier definitely did his part. He is a really responsible two-way center, definitely a Selke type of player, but he did average a point per game last year, just a shade under, 0.99, 95th percentile there. 93rd percentile in goals, 95th in assists, 96th in shots, 3.16 shots per game last year. The power play numbers are a little bit lower, 86th percentile there, but that's not bad at all. And he does get a couple of shot blocks to throw in there as well. He's on an upward trajectory over the last 3 seasons, a 68, 74, and a 76 in my completeness rankings. And again, you're getting access to this New Jersey Devils offense, which is definitely something that you do want access to. I have him right behind Kempe at 69th overall. And if you could find him in that range, again, this is a guy similar to Kempe where there's certain things that he doesn't do. He doesn't hit a lot, and you're looking for more completeness out of him than Kempe, where Kempe didn't have a lot of assists. Nico Hischier does do a little bit more of everything except for hitting. But this is a guy that is, still growing into his role in the NHL. And in this elite offense with all that talent, Luke Hughes coming on, obviously you have Dougie Hamilton on the blue line. You've got a number of weapons to work with. If he can get a little bit more power play production, he's probably going to be well above a point per game next year. And this is a guy that you could look for some, mid-round values. 5th, 6th round range is where I'd target Nico Hischier. Up next is a guy who changed teams last year. Before he did that, he was incredibly prolific, one of the best goal scorers in the league. And then he comes to the New York Islanders and his production falls off a cliff. But he is really consistent over the past 5 seasons in terms of his completeness ranking: 76, 79, 78, 79, 76. So you know what you're going to get out of him. You're going to get point production in terms of 92nd percentile, 0.89 points per game. You're going to get goals, 97th percentile there. You're going to get shots, 2.9 shots per game. And power play production was 90th percentile as well. I would have thought he hit a little bit more than he does. He's a 29th percentile in hits, 0.72 hits per game. But nonetheless, if they can figure out a way to utilize him the way that he was utilized in Vancouver on the power play, in that bumper position on the near side, where he's taking that one-timer from the guy down low. I noticed him score a number of times off of that in Vancouver. They just didn't find that chemistry. They didn't find anything to work with in terms of the Islanders when he came over. But, first year when you're with a new team, sometimes that happens, especially when you're going like gangbusters right before you get traded. This year could be a nice reset button for him. There's absolutely nothing new in terms of what's happened on Long Island. They have the exact same team this year. They'll probably have the exact same team next year because they have no cap space. And I wouldn't necessarily bank on him having a crazy breakout season, but if you're looking for that consistent performance, and face-offs, he does take a number of face-offs, and he is really good at that as well. So if you're in a face-off league, you could definitely target him for that, more so than you would target the next guy on this list, and that is Matt Barzal, his teammate. And I mentioned last year, I did a whole video on Matt Barzal and potentially having a breakout season, which would have been last year, and he kind of did. It's not a breakout season in the sense that he, broke out to above what he did his rookie season, but he definitely played a lot better than the previous 3 seasons. So if you're looking at his trajectory, he was a 70 in 18-19, a 72, then a 66, then a 65, kind of on that downward slope, and then he bumped back up to a 72 last year. So he did increase his production, 92nd percentile in points, 97th in assists, 93rd in power play points. You just don't get a ton of shot volume out of him. 2.4 shots per game is 85th percentile. It's not bad. You would like to see him shoot more. You'd like to see some more goal production. He's 80th percentile in goals. He doesn't hit it all, and he's not a huge shot blocker, so you're not getting a complete player. But he's relatively healthy. He is the top line center on Long Island, and they should be a good team where they're in that 20 to 16 range in terms of overall rankings in the league. And if you can get access to their top line center and the guy who's going to be getting a lot of the power play points, that may be something that would interest you, especially if you can get him later in those rounds. If you can find him in the 6th, 7th, 8th round range, that would be the optimal spot to draft him, in my opinion. Just looking at it now, I have him at 75 on my rankings, which would probably put him in that 6th, 7th round range, depending on league size, and that would be where you would want to target him. If you get him after that, maybe it's more value for you. I don't know if I would personally take him there because of the lack of goal scoring and the lack of shot volume, which is something that you do typically want in fantasy, regardless of your league format. Now, up next, this is a guy that was doing extremely well for about 3/4 of the season and then kind of tailed off a little bit as far as my memory serves, and that's Claude Giroux. Now, he was, obviously this top 6 in Ottawa is going to be picked apart this year in fantasy drafts. There's a number of guys that you would want exposure to, and he kind of gets lost in the shuffle in terms of, you would obviously want Tkachuk, you'd want Stützle, you would want Batherson. There's a number of guys, Tarasenko coming over. Maybe he garners a little bit more attention. But Claude Giroux quietly went about his business and had a really nice season last year. And he was just a shade under a point per game, 9.96 points per game, 95th percentile there. 95th percentile in goals, a little bit below a 40-goal pace. 91st percentile in assists, 89th in shots, and 91st in power play points. The key here will be, who do they have on their top power play unit? Because they've got so many guys that they can't fit on there. They've got 3 defensemen that they could have on there, Sanderson, Chychrun, Shabbat. They could have a number of different forwards out there, Stützle, Tkachuk, Tarasenko, Giroux, Batherson, etc. Josh Norris probably would factor in if I'm just looking at goal scoring and what they have to offer there. Claude Giroux, if he's there on that power play 1, he's going to be benefiting from the rest of those guys. He's been trending in the right direction over the past 3 years, a 66, 71, and then a 75 on my completeness rankings. He's been relatively healthy, 95.87% of his team's games over the last 5 years. So there's really nothing in his file that's making you not draft him, other than the fact that he's, a little bit longer in the tooth, a little bit older, and maybe a little bit less sexy on that file. But you are getting access to the Sens top 6, and that is something that you're going to want to value pretty highly when you're getting him. I have him ranked 77. So if you can get him in that 6th, 7th round range, he's a guy who used to be dual position eligible. If he is again, that would be, again, incredible value for you. And that would be something that I would look at in terms of trying to find some deep value on teams that are loaded. If he somehow squanders, finds his way into the top power play unit, that's definitely a guy that I would be looking at in that range. But that's going to do it for the center tiers list. Let's look at the methodology really quick, show you the full list. What you see here, the player name, their final ranking. This is the weighted rankings that I just finished today. The percent difference from the guy beneath them. So obviously there's distinction here. So McDavid is 3.9% higher than McKinnon. He's 3.5% better than Draisaitl, and so on. And then they kind of get clustered here. So what we ended up going with was a k-means clustering algorithm that determined where these tiers were segmented. And so this is the methodology for that. I'm not going to necessarily bore you to death with the data, but that k-means clustering algorithm is what generated these tiers and drop these guys into these rankings. So obviously Connor McDavid is in a tier of his own, and then beneath that you had these tiers underneath. And if you want any more of these weighted rankings, if you want to use custom rankings customized to your league format, your point weighting, if you want access to the player hub, the goalie hubs, I'll be doing goalie tiers in the next couple of videos, as well as other positions, defense, right wing, left wing, etc. If you want any of those tools, you can find them in the Patreon link in the description below. For $3 a month, you get access to all of the data tools that I use on the channel and some other ones that don't get featured as much. And then for $5 a month, you get all of those tools plus access to the Data Draft Discord group. We're running another Data Draft Discord group league this year. If you want access to that, you got to get in now and try to flag someone down, tell us that you want to be in that league. We're going to try to cap it at 14 teams, maybe 16 max. So if you want to get access to that, Patreon link in the description below. But that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching. I know it was a long one. I appreciate all the time that you're spending watching these videos. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.